everyone, and welcome to Simply Human YouTube channel and podcast. I'm Christina Caro, clinical psychologist, and this is my partner, Karen Lee Linsky, executive leadership and self-trust coach. Good morning, Karen.
Good morning, Christina. I'm so
Oh.
excited. We're getting close to another one to share with everybody and close to the end of our series, right?
Yes. There's just today, and we have two more, the feeling functions, and then we will be wrapping up with the Z model of decision making. But for now, for you folks who might be stumbling on this episode for the very first time, we've been working on Carl Jung's cognitive processing functions that he wrote about in his 1923 book, Psychological Types. Now, some of you may be more familiar with this as the Myers-Briggs personality type, which was derived from Carl Jung's work. And Carl Jung was a psychoanalyst that was a contemporary of Freud. So our goal in this series has been to highlight cognitive diversity, that people have different ways that their brain is wired for their preferred way of processing. And I say preferred because it's similar to handedness. Like we can all, if we had to, write with our non-dominant hand, but we're wired to have more skill in one particular hand. And it's the same thing with these ways that we process information and the way that we make decisions. And whether it's internal or external, that these are preferences that we hone and master over our lifespan. But the brain is also plastic. The brain is also growing. So as we get further along in life, we will continue to have more and more access to our non-dominant functions and developing them as well. So we have gone over 4 different ways of gathering information. And now we are in the section of 4 different ways of judging, or how we make decisions, how we organize the data that we find. This is a 6th of 8 episodes, and it is focused on the judging function of thinking, and specifically this is thinking in the introverted attitude. So this is an inward, analytical, logical process.
And what I love about this too, I just want to put a point here where going through this series, you really get to be able to see and learn more about your own self and also understand someone else. Like I got to learn better about, the interaction between me and my husband, Mark, or me and my clients, and so on. It just put a little bit of how I can interact with them differently and more powerfully together. So that's what I really love about this series. So, but before we start, we want you to help us out and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share, hit that notification button, because we really want to engage you as a community so that you can learn more about more than just a surface explanation of things that we actually talk about. So that's what's so exciting. And for you podcast listeners, hit the text us link in the show notes so you can give us your questions and comments. So let's go to the episode, because the thing that I want to ask you first, of course, is what is this introverted thinking cognitive process, and why do you call it the inner algorithm?
Yeah, that's a great question. So last week we talked about extroverted thinking, right? That it's a fairly quick, outward, logical process that's objective, meaning if anyone else needed to understand how you made your decision, it is the criteria that you made the decision by is external to you. It might be rules, it might be procedures, it might be sort of very obvious. Like we did that Apple exercise, big to small, shades of red to less red, stem, no stem, right? Objective, obvious. Internal thinking or introverted thinking is also based in logical analysis, but it is based on subjective criteria. It is an internal sorting that is kind of like an algorithm. If this, then what about, a lot of questions. Why is this happening? Well, it could be this, could be that. And it's analyzing to get greater and greater levels of clarity and granularity, but it's inward. It's internal. It's not necessarily apparent to other people because it's something we do within our head. And that's what makes it an introverted process. And for those of you who don't know, like you've maybe heard the word if you're on YouTube, you've heard content creators say, help us with the algorithm. You might have a vague sense of what an algorithm is, but let me just go over to give you a visual for those of you who are on YouTube. And if you're on the podcast, we'll describe it. So here's an example. This is what we mean by an algorithm. It's a picture of a flow chart. So you have a starting point, and then you have these rectangles that are actions, and then you have a diamond shape that is usually a question point. Is this the situation? Yes. Then you go on to the next point. Is this the situation? No. Well, maybe you need to back up a couple of steps. And I'm showing a very simple one direction linear algorithm. So we have some people who combine this introverted thinking with that extroverted sensing. So you might experience it a little bit more like in this linear flow. Okay, and this is a simple algorithm. Or maybe you're more of the extroverted intuitive, and this is what your algorithm looks like. There's like multiple directions that could go, multiple questions happening at the same time, multiple feedback loops that can loop back on each other. And you can see it's a much more complex algorithm. And then basically the way to picture it, I love this artist rendition of the introverted thinking brain, where it's kind of multidimensional and all these different connections are going on inside the brain and even beyond. I think this is a beautiful artist rendering of what an inner algorithm might look like. If you're on the podcast, it's sort of a picture of a profile with this multi-dimensional connections of different points and equations, and it's like all inside the brain and getting, kind of coming out this way and that way. And it's just a really pretty depiction of it. So that gives you an idea of what this looks like.
Yeah, and Christine, I was going to say the one we were just talking about with the simple thinking algorithm, like more complex, remind me of I think of like the supercomputer, right? It's like the supercomputer that takes all these other things, can really quickly go through all these different avenues, right? And think through the if then and sort it through and all this stuff. And then you think about just some people like me, just to take one issue, like it's straight down. It's really straightforward. That's what you mean by just the simple algorithm, right? It's one only yes, no. It's not if, and then there's a lot of different decision points. I think that's why there's like the supercomputer. So that's what reminds me of that picture. It's like this head with all the supercomputer going on in the head and all things flying out, this wizardry flying out. So that's what I was thinking about.
I love that wizardry flying out of the brain.
Yeah, wizardry, right? It just goes like that before you know it. And I think that's what's amazing about the brain, because in such a short period of time, it comes up with a thought, because very much our brain is like that wizardry type of thing.
It is the brain is a supercomputer. And what you can see with this, hopefully some of you folks are maybe starting to make this connection that the judging functions are how we organize data and then how we use it to draw conclusions. So it's very influenced by the first part, which is that preference for how we gather information. So if I tend to gather information with that extroverted sensing, and I tend to be oriented to discrete factual pieces of data, then my process is going to be quick and much more simple. But if I use that extroverted intuiting to gather my data, then there's all the different possibilities. So then using that introverted thinking to sort through it and work through it is going to look more like this complex algorithm. So you could see how the two interact and influence each other.
And the value, and I think it's the point of the value of both, right? Because one isn't necessarily worse than the other. It's just it's respecting the different types of how different people work, and there's value in both, right? So that's the whole point of this as well.
Yes, because the strength of extroverted sensing with introverted thinking is going to be when you need that very quick tactical, how do we get from A to B very rapidly? And the strength of the extroverted intuition with introverted thinking is when you have something maybe much more complex that you need to be thinking about all the potential consequences and really giving it a deep analysis, then that's going to be beneficial. And then they both have their shortcoming, and we'll go more into depth on that. Okay, so let's go a little bit into the prevalence. Now, this type of thinking, which really is quite important when you think about the complexity of the world today, it really is an important function to be using. And I would say in our society, there is an underuse of it. And there's a reason why there's an underuse of it. It is only 16% of the population. So for people who have this as their dominant function, you have the combination with the extroverted sensing, ISTP, and the Myers-Briggs. That's only 5.4%. And this is where you see the tactical problem solving. It's much more mechanical. You see this actually a lot of athletes have this. There was a really good example of a baseball player, because in baseball, you have to be in the moment what happens, right? When the ball is hit, but you are simultaneously aware who's on first, who's on second, where would I throw the ball? If it comes to me, like, who do I have to take out first? You are doing it is so rapid and quick within the moment data that it comes across almost instinctually. It's also
interesting.
When we say mechanical mastery, you also find a lot of these folks are drawn to mechanics because of how, say, think about a car engine. Oh, well, if I tweak this part over here downstream, it might affect this thing over there. So they do have to be thinking, but it's very hands-on. It's, you're running a test right now. You've got your instruments in there. You're tweaking something. You see the response. So you see a lot of people drawn to this because it really works well with their strengths. The other type is the extroverted intuitive combined with introverted thinking. That's the INTP and the Myers-Briggs. Only 3.3% of the population.
Well, again, small.
Very,
Yeah.
very small. These are a lot of your theoretical analysis. You find them in law, you find them in science, systems engineers, systems thinking, academia. And so it is a really, really very rare type. There are the people who have it as their second, so they're auxiliary. If you remember our car metaphor, they're not the driver of the seat, but they're the co-pilot. The ESTP, so again, it's extroverted sensing, introverted thinking. It's the second one, only 4.3%. And these are more like that athlete that I talked about. These are your firefighters. These are your first responders. You find a lot in the military is they need to be able to operate on some operating principles, but also to be adaptive in the moment. And then you have the ENTPs, extroverted intuition with introverted thinking, is only 3.2% of the population. And these are, innovators, again, a lot in engineering, academia, theoretical thinking, applied though, because they want to take those ideas, new ideas. So that's why you have your innovators, because extroverted intuitives, if you remember, are what something could be. And then they're applying an analysis on, okay, but could this happen? Could that happen? What if, because they're trying to think through, like, how do we get from A to B, this future thing, and the most logical approach to it.
So I'm excited to hear about some fictional examples so I can really put into mind some people. So what are the fictional examples of those characters? I love when you do this because I feel like that actually cements it for me because so what are some of those of the ISTP and INTP and
So I did a search on this and this made sense to me. So for the ISTP, so the introverted thinking, I'm doing examples of the dominant type. So the introverted thinking combined with that extroverted sensing. I don't know how many of you saw the Jason Bourne, like all the Bourne supremacy, and there's a whole bunch of books and movies. I tried to find a video clip of it, but I couldn't find one that didn't have a copyright on it.
That's part of our problem, right?
Yeah. And if you're not familiar with Jason Bourne, and he's so good because when you watch the film, you'll see like you don't see him thinking through the stuff. You just see it being executed, and it's in the moment. The CIA
He's so
is maybe
quick.
after him, and he's walking down, and then he has to he sees something up ahead. He's gathering in all those details really quickly, and then he'll take a left really fast, and he has to adapt instantly.
Mm-hmm.
There was a great scene that I wanted to clip where he's talking to this woman, and he's saying, I know, like, I saw I could tell you the license plates on 5 of the cars that were following us, and he was listing all of that sensory data he took
Oh,
in.
wow.
It was such a perfect example of ISTP. And the other one, if you're a little bit of the older generation, it would be James Bond. And especially the more modern, I think the most modern version of James Bond, I forget that actor's name, but he does a really good job. Very, very similar.
Craig.
He's having to analyze everything in the moment, but respond also in the moment.
But you can see him thinking, though. I think maybe it's just the James Bond that I know
No, you
with
see it.
Craig.
You see it in their
I see him
face.
thinking because he's like, you can
Yeah.
see him scanning, and then he's like, quick. I go like this and this, and I was like, oh my gosh,
And this is key.
because he
Uh,
pauses.
Introverted thinking, because it's an inward process, you aren't hearing them talk through the analysis. It's more you see it in their face. You can sometimes see the eyes scanning.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
You'll see it all in the body with the ISTP. The
Mhm.
INTPs are a little bit different. The Sherlock Holmes is a really good example, and I am going to play a film clip. So Sherlock Holmes is your example for INTP, questioning reality, analyzing complex systems. And you do hear a little bit more with the NTPs if you ask them that they can more that they're more than happy to walk you through it. I find that to be much less with the ISTPs because it happens so instinctively, they often cannot tell you how they know what they
Mhm.
know. INTPs, because of that extroverted intuition, they have this future idea and then they can walk you through the analysis of it. So let's look at a real quick clip of this. So let's see,
Cool.
folks, if I can do this.
For your father to drown in his own bathtub required more modern science. Very clever of Reardon to find a paralytic that was activated by the combination of copper and water and was therefore undetectable once the bathwater was drained. It might have been quite a challenge for me had he not also tested it on some unfortunate amphibians. The death of Standish was a real mystery until you used the same compound to blow up the wharf. An odorless, tasteless, flammable liquid. Yet it burned with an unusual pinkish hue. Did Standish mistake it for Ray as he entered the temple? All it took was a spark.
Okay, so that's just a little taste. Like he's showing you all the different connections that he made from the bathtub to the frogs he found in a bowl to, one thing after the other. He's walking you through how he's made all these connections from the data he's collected.
And what you said earlier, it's like because it's like making the connections and using that complex system, right? Because it was this versus here, and then going through it. So you could almost, so it's interesting how he like went through because it wasn't just like simple straight down. It was this, and then there's a whole bunch of, So I love that, and that's what I love about these examples because as I see these different examples you use, it allows me to actually, oh, now I get it because I can memorize those people when I like it's like my what is it called? Like my icon or something for that type. And so it's easier
Archetype.
for me to read and say, oh, that he's more like that, right? And then allows me to use the knowledge that I'm gaining from this to say, oh, now I get it. I can so it's interesting. So I love when you bring fictional examples,
And folks,
because it's
you can go online and just Google what is an example of ENTJ, what is an example of a ISFP, and it'll give you a list. Now it's interesting. There's some debate. Like I had to go through a few because I understand it well enough to see that an example given maybe isn't quite right. So
yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's why I like using your examples.
yeah, it actually took me, again, this is a rare type, and so it was a little bit harder to find the examples. Kind of like the INFJ, a lot of what came up was anime.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Okay, those are not going to be widely known. Okay, so why don't we go over just the general description? The way to think about this cognitive function, like we already said, it's an internal framework of analysis based on subjective criteria. Now, the subjective criteria can be just logical analysis, like cause and effect. If I light this paper on fire, it will, burn up in 2 seconds. But if I wet the paper first, then it'll probably smolder. It's just an analytical process. So there's this internal logical framework. And one of the ways that you might see it manifest also is principles, because principles are internally held, like our guiding principles, telling, truthfulness, like liberty is a guiding principle, freedom is a guiding principle. And so there may be the criteria that use inside are these principles, but if the person isn't sharing them with you, you won't know how they're coming to the conclusion that they're coming to. So it needs to be brought outward what the principles are. You will see a focus on precision and thinking. They are very, especially the intuitive type, extroverted intuitives, use very precise language, because if I'm not using precise language and if I say X, well, that's going to lead down a different algorithm path. So I have to be really precise so it goes in the direction that I want it to go. You'll see them in meetings picking apart somebody's words. If somebody is less precise with language, they'll say, well, is that what you really mean? Well, that's not what that means. And they'll be really picky about that. And some will find it as annoying.
Oh, interesting. So they do focus on the words and the precision of the words being used.
Precision of the word, the precision of the concept, because it affects the outcome. Remember, this is a judging decision-making process.
Yeah.
Precise, it's going to lead to a different outcome.
Yeah.
Have to be precise. They do analyze how things work in that context of principles. They value understanding sometimes over application and actual action. If you remember, extroverted thinking is very quick to action, quick to decision over the understanding. And introverted thinking is the depth of understanding, sometimes at the cost of action. And to give you an experience of this, we're going to go back to the apple exercise. Go ahead and pause the video to go grab 4 apples, 4 pairs of socks, just 4 things that are the same but have some differences, and then I'll walk you through the exercise. Okay, now that you have your apples or your socks or whatever it is that you grabbed at least 4 of, lay them out, just put them on the table in front of you. And then I want you to think within yourself, okay, don't necessarily explain it to anybody right now. I want you to create a logical framework for organizing or categorizing your object in a way that makes sense to you, and then include alternatives. For example, if you have 4 socks and you organize them, and then ask yourself, hey, how else could I organize it? And then how else can I organize it? So see if you can find 2 or 3 different frameworks with your object. And then you can pause the video while you do this exercise. Okay. Now, Karen, did you try it? Well,
I got to tell you, what I did was I was imagining it. I know how I would rank them, because I think ranking them like with the apples, it'd be from a darker, right, to lighter color. I could see myself doing that.
Okay. That's extroverted thinking.
That's the problem, because I'm not an extroverted thinker. So that proves how I'd be different from everybody else. But even the socks, I was thinking about it, because I noticed what I probably do it is by dirtiest to cleanest, or cleanest to dirtiest, because that's what I would probably do.
Which is not okay. That's fine. So let's say you start off there, but then the next step.
Let's look at
Then
other
what?
things. So go
So
ahead.
yeah,
No,
keep
because
going.
like
So then you
for the
say,
apples, right? You go shiniest to whatever, then I would use that from from the amount of bruising. That's what I would go to the next level that you could do. Another way you could rank them.
alternative extroverted thinking. So just so you folks know,
That's why.
what you're seeing for Karen is that introverted thinking is of the 8 cognitive functions, it's number 7 for her. It's not only in the back of the trunk, it's like buried underneath the spare tire, somewhere where she doesn't have to use it. So what it often would sound like is this: we come to the group that's doing it, and the first thing out of their mouth with the instructions I gave is, that's not enough information for me to do this exercise.
But I think that's great, because that exactly is the difference between introverted thinking brain. They would say there's not enough instructions.
There's not
I can
enough
see that. They need more information than just
It's not precise enough.
yeah.
It's not a precise. I have done this type of exercise with many, 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 many groups. And that is always the first thing that is said is they don't do it. First, they don't do anything. They're like, well, that there wasn't enough instruction. Did you mean this? Was I supposed to look at that? Am I supposed to look at, what do you mean by correct? And they really want more. And I have to tell them, but if that's the only information you're given, how would you do it? And then the language, it's a language where you hear it. They wouldn't say, well, dark to light. They would say, well, if I had to do this, if it's based on color, then I would do it this way. But if it's like the shade of the color, then it would be this. But it could have been like, what if I turned them upside down and maybe I did it on bruising? And like, if you told me it was bruising, then I would do it on that, but you didn't give me enough information. And so this is what you hear. You hear all these different alternatives and the frustration around not having enough information to execute it precisely, and just not enough information, not enough. So since you're not giving me enough information, I'm going to give you 10 different responses.
But
and then you tell me.
Yeah, and I just saw actually that complex algorithm come up. Okay, because you just said, if it was this is what it'd be. If it was this, okay, so it's like that first row. If it was this, there's like 5 different routes because it depends on if, right? So I thought that's cool. I get it now. Now I have that other person in mind.
This is a little bit of a trick question, because Karen was, looking for the answer. And the thing is, what it actually sounds like is that frustration that wasn't enough information to do this task, which, think about from the extroverted thinking, organized based on objective criteria. They're like, fine. Yeah, like they have no problem coming because it's objective, and they're just like, okay, big to small. Red to less red, stem to no stem. They don't get the frustration of there's not enough information. That wasn't precise enough instruction. But the introverted thinking is like, well, I want to do it precisely, and I don't have, if you think about that algorithm for them, there's a whole bunch of missing pieces. So how do I get the algorithm to work?
And also, words matter. The words you use when you describe it matter. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Yeah. I always love that apple experience. I always love when you get mixed. It makes it much more clear, even in the other one. Well, it's a great way.
Had the large sample to see what is the consistent response we see with this particular function, because it is consistent, which means certain behaviors are predictive of these different functions. You look at samples with it.
So if you were to go into the actual gifts, what are some of the gifts, and so what are some of the challenges that you typically run into when you're this type?
There are many, many gifts to this. These are your problem solvers, like accurate problem solving, and whether or not it's with intuition and much more complex problems, or whether you're out in the field and you need someone who can take in a lot of sensory information quickly, boom, come up with action. They're just excel at tactical as well as strategic problem solving, depending on the combo, which is really, really cool. They have the ability to spot logical inconsistencies. So they make very good lawyers because, again, they will parse words and they will know what those words mean. And in law, you're looking for that little advantage. How can you listen and then see the advantage and then exploit that advantage? So it actually makes them good sales people as well.
Mm.
So, and then they have a deep understanding of systems, and like I said, like mechanics, they're really good at understanding, spacecrafts, whether it's a car, a spacecraft, a motorcycle, machinery. Like it's like their brain can sort of understand, like an algorithm when it comes to mechanics. It's like they understand how all the parts
Work together.
function
Yeah.
together. Yeah. And so they're very good diagnosticians,
Okay.
excellent diagnosticians. So they might go into medicine because they're very, very good diagnosticians. Like an ER doc can be an extroverted sensate with
Okay.
introverted thinking. And then they're very independent thinking. So remember, this is subjective. So they're really the most free from caring what other people think, because especially if it's dominant, they trust 100% their own analytical process. And if they've decided that your analysis is flawed, they never worry about what you think again. Like you've lost credibility with them.
But does that mean they're closed though to like other people's ideas? That's what I don't understand when you say that. So independent thinking.
They're close to stupid.
Oh, okay.
ideas.
Okay. Well, so let's just get into challenges then. So what are some of the challenges? Because that's what I was interested. Because you say that, I'm like, okay.
Yeah,
Do they always think they're right necessarily,
you
or
will
no? Like,
you will have to debate. I mean, it's not that they're closed. You can absolutely debate and argue, but it's a debate. You have to
those are your
demonstrate that your logic
debaters,
is
isn't
superior.
it?
Yes,
They are your.
they are the debaters. They're excellent. That's why they make good lawyers,
Yeah.
because they're excellent at debate.
Yeah, and they look for your
yeah,
gray
if
in the grayness to go in. That's what I was saying about when you were saying about that, where the opening opportunities are is like a grayness. They can see the grayness in situations, right? There's yeah.
it's
Oh
not,
no.
no, it's not grayness, because they want to organize.
Oh,
They want
okay.
to make the gray black and
Okay.
white. They want to make it
Okay.
clear. They want clarity. What I was saying is, if you have a flaw in your logic, if you have a flaw in your analysis, they pick it up instantly and they will exploit it. This is why they're such good debaters. And they're just very, very good at breaking complex things down into their most fundamental components. It really is, like I said, it's very rare, and it's less than 20%. So it is rare, but I have it as my third, but because of life experiences, I developed it actually as my second. And we talked about when you are using the things that are natural for you, you get energy. So when I'm around this kind of thinking, I can get really energized
I remember
around,
that. Yeah.
because
Because
they
right, but
stimulate
for
your
me,
brain
who
and
hates debaters, which is this type, I don't have
right.
this. Like we said, I'm in the trunk, and I'm like, oh, I just shut down.
So actually, yes. What Karen, this is so important. What Karen just said, you guys, this is so important. When something is your non-dominant function, not only are you not prone to using it, but you find other people who are coming from there. You don't know why, but they annoy you, they drain you, you shut down around them. But that's your little warning sign of, oh, this is something in myself I haven't developed. How can I pause for a moment? It'll be draining. It'll be draining to be around it. Even for me, since it is my third, and although it's developed, my cup fills up faster though, and I will get drained by it faster as well. And this goes into the challenges. This type gets stuck in analysis paralysis. They will sort it into finer and finer levels of granularity. But if you bring in an unexpected variable, the whole process has to start over again because it changes the algorithm. And so then you have to go through that process again, and an unexpected thing happens, and boom. This is with the intuitive types. The same though with sensate types. They try to gather as much as the factual data as possible. These guys tend to have their spreadsheets. They actually like having spreadsheets because they put all that factual data in, and then they want to do their analysis. But you'll see a little bit more impulsivity with the extroverted sensate, because they do want to kind of move within the now and do something in the now. But they still are going to go through it. And if an unexpected variable comes in, they also would feel compelled to resort. But what you'll see with them is, if it happens too many times, it starts to break down, and that impulsivity especially the ESTPs, the impulsivity, the need to act will take over without fully thinking it through. So it's hard to talk about the challenges because it's very nuanced with each of the 4 types that has this function. Other challenges for this type is they might struggle to communicate that complex inner framework. Like if you try to ask somebody, how did they get to that conclusion? I find this more with the sensates, the extroverted sensates with introverted thinking. You'll see more impatience with them at having to try to go explain that process. They'll maybe give it a try once. With your extroverted intuitives, it's a little bit different. They can go over every detail of it. So they are a little bit better at bringing out that internal framework. As a matter of fact, their challenge is the opposite, is people get really annoyed, like, oh my God, I just asked you what time it is. I don't need to know how you built the watch. I don't need to know about the beginning of how time was invented and go through every aspect of that. They may forget to make that process explicit. They might prioritize this perfectionism, this perfect understanding over the practical action. Again, that's more with the intuition. I have a friend who is an engineer who has this type that is INTP, and he told me a really funny story about his wife had asked him to build some stairs outside their townhouse. And so what he told me he did is, in his mind, he went through the process. In his mind, he imagined going to the hardware store. He imagined walking up and down the aisles and what he would need to pick up, and then what the process would be for building the stairs. And he's envisioning and analyzing and putting it all together. And then he reached an internal sense of completeness. Nothing had actually
Oh my
happened.
gosh, an internal sense of completeness and nothing happened. Wow. Okay.
So his wife comes home and says, "Where's the stairs?" And he's like, "What?"
I thought I did it.
And yes, and so what you'll see with this type is a lot of incomplete projects. They'll often get to 90%. Again, this is more the intuitive type. They'll get to 90%, and then that energy drops off because they reached a sense of internal completeness. And to complete something in the external world is an extroverted judging function. So it doesn't always manifest.
That's interesting.
This type tends to be pressure prompted as well. And we have done an episode in our podcast called It's Not Always Procrastination, but it will look like it. It'll look like procrastination because that's an internal process that you don't see manifesting. So because of that processing internally, you won't see anything happening. And then it takes that pressure. They'll be like, now I got to do it at the last minute. And it does look like procrastination. To get it to manifest in the external world, they may need a lot of reminders, which is a challenge to get it into the external world, which could look like what I've seen this in groups, the projections of how people interpreted this behavior was procrastinating, avoiding, not following through. Like there can be a lot of consequences to one's credibility if there is this pattern of not taking the internal into the external, or if you can't, you should have a partner who is your implementer in the external world so that you have the best of both. You have that deep analysis, but then you can share it with someone who's really good at then taking that and turning it into something and reaching the actual goal. So they can also appear overly critical, like Karen said, they're the debaters, and that can be really annoying because really these folks debate as recreation. It's like playing a game of chess.
Yeah.
It gets their energy up, but it can be draining for other people. And they also will have a lot of trouble with what they see as arbitrary rules or illogical systems. If it doesn't make sense to them, it's like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
The objective criteria we talked about with extroverted thinking, they're like, why? Well, why are we explain it to me? And this is what happens with objective criteria. It might have been developed 10 years ago. The person doesn't actually know why. It's just like they follow it because it's there in the rule book. And the introverted thinking is like, so why are we doing it now? What does it have to do with now? What does it have to do with where we're going? Why are we still doing this? questioning, questioning, and questioning. That can be very valuable. It's a double-edged sword. It depends on how you look at it, but it can also be seen as insubordinate. It can be seen as troublemaking. It can be seen as resistance. It's many, many things it can be interpreted as, but it's because an introverted thinker, it's discombobulating to be doing something that makes no sense. It's painful to do
Yeah.
something that makes
And
sense.
so it's interesting too, because the people who are on the other side could be like, you don't respect the past, right? And have some, because of the fact that that person is thinking it doesn't make any sense. Why would you even think about doing that? So that's what I was saying about my own clients. So that's probably where I was going a minute ago. We're trying to think through, like, because I know some of my clients are like this, right? And so that was interesting when you're describing all that, like, oh, now that makes sense. And that's why I shut down when he debates with me. So now I know. So
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, because we're running out of time soon. So what are some of the takeaways or things that I can do to become an ally, or what are some of the words I can use, or when this comes up, when I'm not this type of person, what's the best way to engage this person, to slow them down? Or
Well, those are two different questions: how to engage, how to slow down. So let's start with engaging, how to engage this person. This type really values sound logic. So say you're a feeling type, say you're in a partnership, okay? And let's say, I know we haven't gone over it, but let's say you're an introverted feeling type who makes their decision based on your logical framework is the framework of emotions, sort of the shifting values and feelings about what feels right to me. It's really hard to engage an introverted thinker in that kind of a conversation, because they're just like, what do your feelings have to do with anything? So it's also in engaging is giving them really hard problems to solve. They're problem solvers. So if you have a complex problem, that's yummy. You engage and like, hey Joe, like I've got this issue. I've got these 3 different choices. I'm trying to figure out, what's the best one to do. That's almost the best, right? There's multiple options and my algorithm is going
I
to
love
sort
that.
through
I
all the
love
different.
that. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So they
love that.
really are about engaging and problems, like know what their strength is. There's Marcus Buckingham is a strength-based researcher that we follow, and he's done a lot of work about how do you engage employees in the workplace, but it's also just the same in relationships. Is when you engage people in their strengths, when you understand what their strengths are, and that's where you focus your engagement strategies, you are going to be more successful. So introverted thinking is problem solving. Now, how to slow them down. So that again, nuanced with, say, an ESTP. So there is a tendency to be quick. You do just have to say, well, whoa, wait, like, hold on, walk me through it.
Yeah, I love
You
that.
just do that prompt, walk me through it. ENTP types, again, it's secondary with ENTP. It's the same thing. It's like they're more than they tend to be much more proactive about, they like to teach. So they like to walk people through. And if it's too much, then just say, okay, wait, slow down. Let me see if I understand. Like reiterate, ask questions, learn how to ask good questions. INTPs, the dominant introverted thinking with extroverted intuition, it's bringing that out more, because that dominant introverted thinking, they have a little more of that trouble of remembering to bring it out. So it's like, can you, walk me through how you got there? What were your thoughts here? What were you thinking here? What did you do with that variable? How did you consider this? You're inviting them to bring it outward. ISTPs, it's similar. It's a more of the hold on, because of that extroverted sensate desire to make some action in the now. And what's hard with this type is, like I said, they are more the type, if you try to, like, how did you get here? They don't always know. It feels instinctive.
Okay.
And so it's that one, you just have to be a little bit more like, can you
Right.
can you help me understand how you got there? Someone will be like, I don't know. It's just what needs to happen. I think what you do there is someone needs to think through some contingencies in case whatever their instinct doesn't work.
Okay. Cool.
I would say 8 times out of 10, it's going to work. 8 times out of 10. So allow them to have the track record to demonstrate their strength, and allow yourself, if you're the type who is like a extroverted feeling, extroverted thinking type, you will have discomfort with this level of instinctive processing. It would be good to train yourself to observe that person and observe their track record, because they tend to have a good track record of success. And then you start to learn to just trust that and rely on it. And then you have contingency planning around the 20% when it goes
I love
sideways.
that. I love that advice. No, this is great. This is great because this gives me some practical tips to use, because there aren't that many, but there is enough for where I come up across these. So let's finish up with some other takeaways you would want to say as we finish up.
Well, remember that their strength is building these logical frameworks, and remember that your choice of language matters with these folks. Like, be precise. There are lots and lots of people who are not very precise in their language, and then they get frustrated when they're being held accountable. And you have to just understand they're not doing it because it's a gotcha. They're doing it because they actually want to really understand you, and if you could see that as a gift, this person wants to really understand deeply in order to execute precisely. That's a beautiful thing. It just doesn't come across that. And if you yourself are a ballpark language person, or you're kind of, as long as I'm close enough, or I don't know the word, I feel like I'm having like the word police on me. Just understand that this person's just trying to get their needs met so that they can contribute is the way to understand it. Because they are really good at this tactical or really complex problem analysis. And they do bring a dispassionate approach. So they're really good in a situation where there's a lot of heated emotion. And you can see that whether or not it's in a relationship, in a family, or in an organization, you can get a lot of emotion. These folks are the ones you go to who will just bring this sort of dispassionate logic and talk through all the possibilities. We are going to present the model on how to do the decision making where you have all the components of how to make a holistic decision making. But hopefully you can see the really unique value of this more rare type, and try to see and notice people in your lives. Try to see if you see it in your family and your work environment, and try to suspend that judgment and bring a more appreciative lens to how is this really a positive thing that I'm experiencing.
Cool. Because you and I always talk about this too, is it's so interesting with preciseness of words and what they mean, and getting the people to understand it the same, what these words mean, actually help our relationship so much. And so that's why I love and I appreciate people with this type, because they're exactly what I think is required more in this world. Because we use some words so loosey goosey, right? And so it is that precision that could help us to achieve the outcomes that we really want, because we're not really all on the same page. So precision allows to make sure that you're all on the same page before you move out. So I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right.
Right.
Wrapped it up. So let's close. So again, we just want to ask you to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share, hit the notification button, because of course that also helps our algorithm and get out to more and more people. And also to share it with your person who actually is this type, so they can understand themselves more, or share it with some other person that you know that could use it, because maybe your boss is like this and explains like, oh my God, this is what Jan is like. So, let's figure out, so then it would become more of awareness. So we just really want, again, our intention is to give some more understanding than currently is out there at the surface level. And so we look forward to engaging with you next time. Christine, anything else you want to add?
Yeah. No, just thank you, everybody. Don't forget, be curious, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.